The earth of Anshan remembers. It remembers the hands that worked its clay, the feet that walked its dry riverbeds, the quiet resolve of a people bound to the high plains and rugged mountains. Here, under wide skies, lived the Persians. They were herders of goats and sheep, growers of barley and wheat, their lives measured by seasons, not kings. Their homes were simple, sun-baked brick walls, roofs of woven reeds, courtyards where families gathered at dusk to share bread and stories. They spoke of harmony, Arta, a sacred order woven into creation by Ahura Mazda, the wise lord. Fire, pure and undying, glowed in their sanctuaries, tended by priests whose chants rose like smoke towards the heavens. It was a faith of choices, of good thoughts, good words, good deeds. Not grand temples, but humble hearths and hilltop altars marked their piety. Then came Cyrus, son of Cambyses, of the Achaemenid line. Not with thunder, but with a quiet certainty. He spoke not of conquest, but of kinship. To the Medes, their neighbors, and sometimes overlords, he offered not subjugation, but partnership. "We are of the same blood, the same sky," his messengers might have whispered. And the Medes listened. Their cities, Ecbatana with its cool mountain air, opened their gates. The union felt less like a victory, more like a homecoming. Cyrus became Shahanshah, king of kings. His strength lay not merely in arms, but in understanding the threads that bind men, respect for their gods, their customs, their dignity. In the valleys, life flowed on. A potter shaped vessels for water and grain, his fingers tracing patterns older than memory. A woman ground flour, the rhythmic scrape of stone on stone a constant song. Children learned the names of stars and the paths of migrating birds. Cyrus's ascent was a distant murmur, a shift in the wind felt perhaps in the arrival of new trade goods, a finer wool, a strange spice, carried by travelers on the royal road, its foundations just beginning to be laid by quiet, determined hands. The tapestry unfolds 530 to 522 BCE. Cyrus's gaze turned west, towards Lydia, where King Croesus reigned in golden Sardis. Not greed, perhaps, but the intricate dance of power drew him. The Lydian cavalry, famed and feared, met Cyrus's forces on the plain. Yet the story passed down through Persian villages spoke not of clashing steel, but of ingenuity. Camels, unfamiliar and unsettling to the Lydian horses, were brought to the front. The horses shied, their charge faltered. Sardis fell. But Cyrus walked its streets not as a destroyer. Croesus, legend said, was spared, treated with honor. Cyrus understood the weight of a king's life, the threads of legitimacy. Further west still lay Babylon, ancient and immense, its walls touching the sky, its gods dwelling in towering ziggurats. Within, King Nabonidus ruled, his focus distant, on the moon god Sinfar in the desert oasis of Tamar. The people of Babylon felt adrift, their patron god Marduk seemingly neglected. Cyrus approached not as a besieger, but as a liberator. The great gate swung open. He entered, it was said, to the sound of scattered cheers, not battle cries. His proclamation echoed through the city's baked brick streets, "I am Cyrus, king of the world. When I entered Babylon as a friend and established the seat of government in the palace of the ruler, Marduk, the great lord, moved the noble heart of the Babylonians towards me. He spoke of restoring temples, of letting exiled peoples, like the Jews yearning for Jerusalem, return to their homelands with their sacred vessels. To the Babylonians, weary of uncertainty, this was not conquest, but restoration. Order, Arta, was returning. Taxes were levied, yes, but fairly, measured not by whim but by the land's yield. Satraps, governors appointed by Cyrus, began their work less as overlords, more as stewards, ensuring the king's peace flowed like the life-giving waters of the canals. Back in the Persian heartland, the news arrived with caravans. Farmers tending their terraced fields heard tales of a distant city of impossible scale, of rivers wider than their valleys. They pondered the wisdom of their Shah, who ruled such diverse lands not by fear alone, but by granting each people the space to breathe their own air, pray to their own gods, beneath the umbrella of his enduring peace. The quiet passing and the steady hand, 530 to 518 BCE. The winds blowing east from the Oxus River carried whispers of unrest among the fierce Masashtai, nomadic riders of the vast steppes. Cyrus, the builder of an empire stretching from the Aegean Sea to the edges of the known world, felt the pull to secure this distant frontier. He journeyed north, into the lands beyond the Jaxartes River. The details blurred into legend, a dream, a ruse, a final, desperate stand. Cyrus fell. His body was brought back to Pasargadae, the simple, dignified capital he had founded amidst the Parsa mountains. There, within a limestone tomb resting on a stepped platform, he was laid to rest. No towering pyramid, no vast underground city. Just a solitary chamber under a gabled roof, surrounded by a walled garden, a paradisos, where shade trees and cool water offered solace. The inscription, if it ever spoke, was simple: "Passer-by, I am Cyrus, who gave the Persians an empire and was king of Asia. Grudge me not this monument." It was a statement of presence, not boast. Farmers driving their flocks nearby would see the tomb on the plain, a reminder of the man who walked among them, now part of the earth he ruled. The empire held its breath. Cambyses too, Cyrus's son, ascended. His task was Egypt, the ancient kingdom along the life-giving Nile. The march across the Sinai desert was arduous, a test of endurance for man and beast. Pharaoh Psamtik III met the Persians at Pelusium. The battle was fierce, yet Cambyses prevailed. He entered Memphis, not to desecrate, but to assume the mantle of Pharaoh, adopting titles, respecting the temples, though stories later told of impiety born of misunderstanding or malice. He sought to extend Persian reach south, towards the oasis of Siwa and the lands of Kush, but the desert sands and the Nile's vastness proved formidable adversaries. News of rebellion back in Persia cut his campaign short. On the long journey home, under the harsh Syrian sun, Cambyses died. Was it an accident? Illness? The truth faded like a desert mirage. The empire teetered. In the absence of a clear air, shadows of civil war lengthened. In the bazaars of Susa and the garrison towns, men spoke in hushed tones. Would Cyrus's great tapestry unravel so soon? The weaver restores the pattern, 522 to 518 BCE. From the confusion, a figure emerged, Darius, son of Hystaspes, a prince of the Achaemenid line, a lance-bearer for Cambyses. He spoke not of ambition, but of Drudge, the lie, the chaos threatening the divine order of Arta. A usurper, Gormata, claiming to be Bardia, Cambyses' brother, had seized the throne. Darius, with 6 trusted companions, nobles bound by loyalty, moved with quiet resolve. They found Gormata in a Median fortress. The deed was swift, shrouded in necessary secrecy. Darius was crowned. But the empire fractured. Babylon rose, Elam rebelled, Media stirred, Persia itself saw challenges. Darius did not rage, he acted. He moved methodically, like a master craftsman repairing a precious, intricate weave. Satraps loyal to the old order were confirmed or replaced. Armies marched, not for glory, but for restoration. The battles, at the Tigris, in Armenia, against the rebellious Sakai, were grim necessities recorded starkly on the Behistun cliffs. By the favor of Ahura Mazda, my army smote the rebel host. Victory was only the beginning. Darius understood that order required more than the sword. It needed structure, understanding, connection. He looked upon the vastness of the realm, from the Ionian coast to the Indus Valley, from the Nile's delta to the Caucasus peaks. How to bind such diversity? How to ensure the king's peace reached the furthest village? His answer was woven from many threads. Satraps governed the provinces, satrapies, responsible for justice, order, and collecting the tribute, silver, grain, horses, timber, assessed fairly based on the land's capacity. But watchful eyes ensured balance. The king's eyes and ears traveled incognito, listening, observing, reporting directly to the throne. And binding all, the royal road, a marvel of engineering stretching over 1,500 miles from Susa to Sardis. Caravanserais offered rest and safety. Courier stations, with fresh horses and riders, allowed messages to fly faster than thought. Neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds. News, decrees, intelligence flowed like blood through the empire's veins. In Persepolis, the new ceremonial capital rising in the heart of Parsa, the sound of chisels on stone was constant. Darius envisioned a testament not to war, but to the peaceful diversity he governed. Stone and story at Persepolis, 518 to 500 BCE. The plateau of Marv was transformed. Where once only wind brushed the dry grass, now rose a vast, artificial terrace, hewn from the living rock. Persepolis, Parsa to the Persians, was not a city of bustling streets, but a place of profound ceremony, a stage for the empire's harmony. Darius conceived it, his son Xerxes would build upon it, and artisans from every corner labored for generations. Stonemasons from Ionia, skilled in carving flowing drapery, worked alongside Egyptian sculptors adept at hard stone. Babylonian brickmakers raised walls, Median goldsmiths adorned doors. The Apadana, the great audience hall, took shape. Its roof rested on 72 towering columns, each over 60 feet high, their capitals a forest of carved bulls and griffins. The scale humbled, but the message was in the details. Upon the terrace walls and grand staircases, a silent procession unfolded in carved relief. Delegations from 23 nations approached the king, each distinct, each bearing tribute. Elamites brought lions and bows, Armenians led sturdy horses, Lydians carried intricate vessels and bangles, Indians brought sacks of gold dust and driven parrots, Ethiopians offered elephant tusks and a giraffe, Scythians brought their hardy ponies and felt caps, Ionians bore woven cloth and silver bowls. They were led by Persian and Median nobles, hand in hand, symbolizing the dual core of the empire. No violence marred these scenes. No captives groveled. Only orderly presentation, respect, and the quiet dignity of diverse peoples united under the king's protection. The carvers captured it all: the texture of wool, the pattern of embroidery, the curve of an ear, the set of a jaw. It was a stone census, a frozen moment of imperial unity. The message was clear: the Shahanshah ruled not over slaves, but over proud nations, each contributing their unique gifts to the whole. It was art made visible. In the surrounding villages, the scale of Persepolis was a source of awe, but daily life held its own rhythm. Taxes, assessed with care, were paid in kind, a portion of the harvest, a lamb from the flock. The king's peace meant safety on the roads, fairer justice from the satrap's court than in times past. The fires in the local Ateshka burned bright, tended by a Magi who chanted the ancient Gathas, hymns of Zarathustra, reminding all of the eternal struggle between Asher, truth order, and Drudge, the lie chaos. Life, though hard, felt anchored in a greater, stable whole. The rhythm of the provinces, 500 to 490 BCE. Beyond the splendor of Persepolis and Susa, the empire lived through its provinces. Each satrapy was a world unto itself, yet bound to the center by the Shahanshah's decree and the steady pulse of administration. In fertile Egypt, life revolved around the Nile's annual flood. Persian satraps, often adopting Egyptian titles and trappings, oversaw the vast irrigation network. Scribes in the old temple schools meticulously recorded harvests on papyrus scrolls, calculating the grain tax owed to the great king's granaries. Persian soldiers garrisoned at Memphis and Elephantine lived alongside Egyptians, their interactions recorded in demotic contracts, marriages, loans, disputes settled before local judges applying age-old Egyptian law. The satrap ensured the temples received their due, for the gods of Egypt, like Ahura Mazda, upheld order. Barges laden with grain, linen, and papyrus sailed down the Nile, bound for the Mediterranean and ultimately, Persian storehouses. In bustling Babylon, the air hummed with commerce. The Euphrates teemed with traffic. Persian administration relied heavily on the established Babylonian bureaucracy. Cuneiform tablets in Akkadian detailed everything from land leases to rations for workers dredging the canals. Banking houses, run by families like the Ejibais, financed trade caravans heading east along the Royal Road or south towards Arabia. The satrap in his palace upheld the king's law, but local elders and temple authorities handled most daily affairs. Zoroastrian fire altars existed quietly beside the towering ziggurat of Esagila, dedicated to Marduk. The New Year festival, Akitu, remained the city's heartbeat, its processions and rituals reaffirming the cosmic order, an order now under Persian guardianship. In the highlands of Cappadocia, Persian nobles granted vast estates by the king lived in fortified manor houses. Below them, villages of Anatolian farmers tilled the volcanic soil, herded sheep on the high pastures, and paid their dues in livestock and labor. Greek colonists along the Ionian coast, subject since Cyrus, manned their ships for trade and occasionally for the Persian fleet. Their philosophers pondered the cosmos in bustling cities like Miletus, while Persian officials collected tribute and ensured no one city grew powerful enough to disrupt the peace. Tension simmered, born of cultural difference and the weight of tribute, but open conflict was rare. The satrap in Sardis, residing in Croesus's old palace, mediated, keeping the delicate balance. The system wasn't perfect. Grievances arose, a corrupt tax collector here, a heavy-handed garrison commander there. Appeals traveled up the chain, to the satrap, to the king's court. Justice, while sometimes slow, was seen as attainable. The royal road carried not just goods and orders, but petitioners seeking the king's ear. The sheer scale of the empire meant local customs endured. Persian rule was a layer atop ancient civilizations, preserving much while demanding loyalty and tribute. For most, it was the backdrop to lives lived as they always had, planting, harvesting, worshipping, trading, raising families, under a canopy of enforced, if distant, peace. Faith and fire, the soul of the people, 490 to 480 BCE. At the heart of Persian life, beneath the politics and the administration, pulsed the enduring rhythm of their faith. Zoroastrianism, the teachings of the prophet Zarathustra, Zoroaster, was more than a state religion. It was the framework through which many Persians understood the world and their place within Ata, the cosmic order. Ahura Mazda, the wise lord, was uncreated, the source of all good, a light, truth, life, creation. Opposed to him stood Angra Mainyu, Ahriman, the destructive spirit, embodiment of drudge, the lie, chaos, darkness, death. The universe was a battleground between these primal forces, and every human soul was a soldier. The choice was stark: align with Asher, truth, righteousness, order, or succumb to drudge. This was not a distant theological concept, it permeated daily existence. The hearth fire was sacred. In humble village homes and noble palaces alike, the fire was kept pure, fed only with dry wood and fragrant incense. It represented the divine light of Ahura Mazda, the warmth of community, the spark of life itself. Before it, families gathered for prayers. The Magi, priests trained in ritual and law, tended larger fires in simple, open-air sanctuaries, Ateshka, often on hilltops. These were not temples filled with idols, but places of elemental focus, earth, water, and especially fire reaching towards the heavens. Ritual purity was paramount. Water, symbolizing life and creation, was revered and kept clean. Death was seen as the temporary triumph of drudge. The body, corrupted, could not defile the sacred elements of fire and earth. Thus, the dead were exposed in towers of silence, dakmas, to be consumed by birds, their bones later collected in ossuaries. It was a stark practice, born of profound respect for creation's purity. Ethics were paramount. Zarathustra's core injunction, good thoughts, good words, good deeds, Hamata, Hukta, Hovashta was a practical guide. Honesty in trade, charity to the poor, care for the land and animals, loyalty to family and king, these were acts of warfare against drudge. Truthfulness was not just virtue, it was a weapon against the lie. The king himself was Ahura Mazda's chosen agent on earth, his primary duty to uphold Asher through just rule and the defeat of chaos, rebellion, invasion, injustice. This faith offered comfort and purpose. It explained hardship as the work of Angra Mainyu, countered by the inherent goodness of creation and the human capacity to choose the right. It fostered a sense of responsibility, each person's actions contributed to the cosmic balance. In the quiet of dawn, a farmer tending his field, a scribe recording accounts, a potter shaping clay, each could see their labor as participation in the eternal struggle for light. The fires burned, a constant, hopeful defiance against the surrounding darkness. The stirring at the edge, shadows over Ionia, 486 to 480 BCE. The Aegean Sea, lapping against the shores of Persian-controlled Ionia, was rarely still. In its bustling Greek cities, Miletus, Ephesus, Halicarnassus, the air carried salt, fish, and the murmur of discontent. Persian rule, established decades prior, had brought stability but also the weight of tribute and the presence of sometimes overbearing satrapal officials. The vibrant Greek spirit, chafing under what they saw as barbarian dominion, began to stir. It began in Miletus, heart of Ionian intellect and pride. Aristagoras, the city's ambitious tyrant appointed by Persia, found himself entangled in a failed expedition against Naxos. Fearing Persian reprisal, he made a fateful choice. He renounced his tyranny, declared Miletus a democracy, a radical concept, and ignited a general revolt across Ionia, 499 BCE. Appeals for aid flew west, across the sea, to mainland Greece. Sparta, inward-looking and cautious, refused. But Athens, sensing an opportunity and kinship with the Ionians, sent 20 ships. Eretria sent 5. The flame of rebellion spread. Sardis, the satrapal capital of Lydia, was attacked and burned, including a sacred grove of Cybele. The Persian response, when it came, was methodical, inexorable. Land and sea forces converged. The Ionian fleet, though spirited, was defeated decisively at the Battle of Lade, 494 BCE. Miletus, the cradle of the revolt, was besieged, captured, and its people scattered. The rebellion collapsed. Darius, now an aging king in Susa, received the reports. The burning of Sardis, the Athenian involvement, these were not mere provincial disturbances, they were affronts to the king's peace, acts of drudge. The distant Greek mainland, a patchwork of quarrelsome city-states, had dared to interfere. Persian envoys were dispatched to demand tokens of submission, earth and water, symbols of surrender. Many Greek states, cowed, complied. But Athens and Sparta refused. Legend tells of the Spartans throwing the Persian envoys down a well, telling them to find their earth and water there. Darius understood the need for a demonstration of imperial power. A punitive expedition was planned, not for conquest, but for chastisement, to restore the perceived order. A vast fleet and army assembled. It sailed across the Aegean, subduing islands, and landed near Athens at the plain of Marathon, 490 BCE. The Athenians, heavily outnumbered but fighting for their very existence as a free polis, achieved a stunning, unexpected victory. The Persian force withdrew. In the villages of Persia, news of Marathon was likely a distant ripple, a minor setback in a vast empire. Life continued, barley was sown, goats were herded, fires were tended. But in the corridors of Susa and Persepolis, the message was clear: the western frontier required firmer attention. Darius died before he could respond. The task, and the gathering shadow, fell to his son, Xerxes. Xerxes, the weight of the mountain, 480 to 465 BCE. Xerxes I ascended the throne not only as king of kings but as heir to an unresolved challenge. The defiance of Athens and Sparta was a thorn, a persistent whisper of drudge at the empire's western edge. To ignore it risked encouraging further disorder. To confront it required immense resources and will. Xerxes chose confrontation, less for glory, perhaps, than from a profound sense of duty to the order established by his father and grandfather. Preparations were colossal, a testament to the empire's reach and organization. For years, resources flowed: Egyptian grain, Ionian timber, Lydian gold, Babylonian labor. At the Hellespont, the narrow strait separating Asia from Europe, Persian engineers performed a feat that echoed through Greek nightmares. They built twin pontoon bridges of boats, lashed together with flax and papyrus cables, spanning over a mile across the turbulent waters. When a storm destroyed the first attempt, Herodotus claims Xerxes ordered the sea whipped and shackled, a potent symbol of the king's will imposing itself on chaotic nature. Canals were dug to protect the fleet from Athos's treacherous cape. Supply depots were established along the planned route through Thrace. The army that assembled was staggering in its diversity, a living embodiment of the Persepolis reliefs: Medes in felt caps, Assyrians with bronze helmets, Indians in cotton, Ethiopians in leopard skins, Scythians with their bows, Arabs on camels, and the immortals, the Persian corps, in their glittering robes and gold. The fleet, drawn from Phoenicia, Egypt, Ionia, and Cyprus, numbered in the hundreds. It was less an invasion force, more the entire apparatus of the empire slowly, deliberately, moving west. Xerxes himself observed from a throne of white marble erected on a hillside overlooking the pass of Thermopylae, 480 BCE. Here, a small force of Greeks, led by Spartan king Leonidas, made a legendary stand. For 3 days, they held the narrow path. The story passed into Persian camps might have spoken of fierce courage, of a foe worthy of respect, ultimately overcome by Persian numbers and a traitor's path. The Greeks fought for their land, the Persians fought for the king's command. The fleet engagement at nearby Artemisium was fierce, inconclusive. The Persian tide flowed south. Athens was evacuated, its Acropolis burned, a necessary act to crush defiance, but one that would echo bitterly in Greek memory. Victory seemed near. Then came Salamis. In the narrow straits, the massive Persian fleet became entangled. The lighter, more maneuverable Greek triremes darted in, ramming and boarding. Confusion turned to rout. Xerxes, watching from the shore, saw his naval power shattered. The threat to the Peloponnese vanished. He returned to Asia, leaving his general Mardonius with a formidable land army. The next year, at Plataea, 479 BCE, the final reckoning came. Mardonius fell. The Persian army, deprived of its leader, dissolved. The great expedition, a mountain of effort, ended not with conquest, but with consolidation back in Ionia. Xerxes returned to Persepolis. The magnificent Gate of All Nations and the Grand Apadana were completed. The reliefs continued to show the harmonious procession of peoples. But the cost of the Greek campaigns, in lives, treasure, and imperial prestige, was immense. The western frontier, instead of being pacified, now harbored a confident, vengeful enemy. The fires still burned in the sanctuaries, but the shadow of distant defeat subtly altered the empire's course. Xerxes' later years saw court intrigues. He was assassinated in 465 BCE, a victim of the palace whispers that could thrive even under the wise lord's gaze. The long reign, Artaxerxes and the silent shifts, 465 to 424 BCE. Artaxerxes I, third son of Xerxes, emerged from the shadows of his father's assassination and the bloody elimination of rivals. His name meant he whose empire is perfected through truth, Arta. His long reign, 465 to 424 BCE, would be marked not by grand conquests, but by consolidation, diplomacy, and the quiet management of an empire showing its first, subtle signs of strain. The Greek wound remained open. Athens, victorious and emboldened, had forged the Delian League, transforming it from an anti-Persian alliance into an Athenian empire that actively challenged Persian control of the Aegean and Ionia. Battles flickered, the Eurymedon River, Cyprus. Yet Artaxerxes proved pragmatic. He understood the limits of Persian power projection across the sea. When rebellion flared in Egypt, for 60 BCE, aided by Athenian hoplites, it took a decade of hard campaigning to suppress it. The cost was high, draining resources needed elsewhere. A different strategy emerged: diplomacy and gold. Persian satraps along the Anatolian coast began wielding a potent weapon: subsidies. Vast sums of Persian gold flowed into the coffers of influential Greek politicians, particularly in Sparta, Persia's erstwhile enemy. The goal: to turn the Greeks against each other. The Peloponnesian War, 431 to 404 BCE, the long, fratricidal conflict between Athens and Sparta, became a Persian proxy war. Satraps like Tissaphernes and Cyrus the Younger, Artaxerxes' ambitious younger brother, played a delicate game, shifting support, promising funds and ships, always aiming to keep the Greeks divided and exhausted. The Peace of Callias, c. 449 BCE, though its historicity is debated, perhaps formalized a tacit understanding: Persian dominance in Asia Minor, Athenian freedom in the Aegean. Within the empire, the machinery of administration continued. The royal road remained vital. Taxes were collected, though inflation began to nibble at the edges of the economy. Artaxerxes, known for his calm demeanor and commitment to justice, as Persian kingship demanded, faced internal challenges. Revolts in Bactria and Syria were suppressed, remind us that the satrapal system, reliant on the loyalty and competence of distant governors, was vulnerable. The Magi maintained their influence, but Zoroastrian orthodoxy faced no major challenges. Life in the villages carried on. A farmer in Persis might never see a Greek or an Egyptian, but he felt the empire's reach through the tax collector's measure of his grain, the occasional conscription of his son for garrison duty in distant Babylon, or the presence of imperial craftsmen building yet another section of the king's palace. The faith provided solace, the daily prayers to Ahura Mazda, the reverence for the household fire, the belief that their labor contributed to upholding Arta against the ever-present drudge. Artaxerxes' reign was one of endurance, of holding the complex tapestry together through shrewdness and patience, even as the threads, stretched by distant wars and the relentless friction of governing such diversity, began to show subtle signs of wear. Echoes of discord, brothers and satraps, 424 to 404 BCE. The death of Artaxerxes I for 24 BCE was not the peaceful passing of an old king, but the spark that ignited the gunpowder of dynastic ambition. The smooth succession envisioned by Ahura Mazda's order dissolved into drudge. Xerxes II, the eldest son, reigned for barely 45 days before being murdered in his bed by his half-brother, Sogdianus. Sogdianus's grasp on power lasted only 6 months. Another half-brother, Ochus, emerged from the shadows of the harem intrigues. With the support of powerful satraps and the military, Ochus hunted down Sogdianus, trapped him, and had him suffocated in ashes, a symbolic return to the elements. Ochus ascended the throne, taking the regnal name Darius II. Darius II's reign, 423 to 404 BCE, was consumed by the empire's periphery and the relentless demands of the Greek world. The Peloponnesian War raged on. Persian policy, orchestrated largely by Darius's formidable wife Parysatis and satraps like Tissaphernes and Cyrus the Younger, remained focused on using Persian gold to ensure Greek mutual destruction. Support flowed primarily to Sparta, now seen as the best counterweight to Athenian naval power in the eastern Aegean, which directly threatened Persian interests. Cyrus the Younger, satrap of Lydia, Phrygia, and Cappadocia, became a key player. Ambitious, energetic, and charismatic, he built strong relationships with Spartan commanders like Lysander. Persian gold financed the Spartan fleet that ultimately shattered Athenian power at Aigospotamoi, 405 BCE. Athens surrendered in 404 BCE, its walls torn down, its empire dissolved. Persia, through its subsidies and strategic patience, had achieved its goal, removing the major Greek threat to its Anatolian provinces without committing its own armies to a major war. Yet this victory came at a cost. The reliance on satraps like Cyrus, granting them vast resources and military authority, sowed seeds of future instability. Cyrus, emboldened by his success and his popularity with the Greeks, began to dream of the throne itself. His father Darius II grew ill. The air in Susa and Babylon grew thick with suspicion. Parysatis, fiercely protective of her son Artaxerxes, Darius II's heir by her, watched Cyrus with a viper's gaze. In Egypt, taking advantage of Persian distraction with the Greeks and the dynastic turmoil, a full-scale rebellion erupted under Emertius of Sais. The rich Nile Valley, breadbasket of the empire, slipped from Persian control. Efforts to reclaim it faltered. Darius II died in 404 BCE. His son ascended as Artaxerxes II Mnemen, the Mindful. But Cyrus the Younger refused to offer the ritual submission. The empire, having seemingly secured its western flank through Greek discord, now faced a far more intimate danger, a civil war ignited by the ambitions of a prince nurtured and empowered by the very system he sought to overthrow. The fires of Ahura Mazda still burned, but they cast long, uncertain shadows across the halls of power. The undying fire and the slow erosion, 404 to 359 BCE. Artaxerxes II Mnemen's reign, 404 to 359 BCE, would be the longest in Achaemenid history, a slow, often painful, dance of survival against centrifugal forces. It began with the thunderclap of civil war. Cyrus the Younger, satrap of Anatolia, marshaled a formidable army, including 10,000 Greek mercenaries immortalized by Xenophon. They marched east, deep into the heartland of Mesopotamia. At Cunaxa, north of Babylon, 401 BCE, the brothers clashed. Cyrus fought with desperate courage, wounding Artaxerxes, but was struck down. His death scattered his army. The 10,000 Greeks, stranded deep in enemy territory, began their epic march north to the Black Sea, a journey chronicled in Xenophon's Anabasis, a stark portrait of Persian power seen from the vulnerable ground level. Artaxerxes survived, but the wound at Cunaxa was more than physical. The rebellion exposed the fragility of royal authority and the dangerous autonomy wielded by powerful satraps. Cyrus's vast Anatolian domains needed reassignment. Artaxerxes chose Tissaphones, but the region remained a tinderbox. Revolts flared sporadically, often aided by Sparta, which now saw Persia as an enemy again. The Corinthian War, 395 to 387 BCE, pitted Sparta against a coalition including Athens, Thebes, Corinth, and crucially, financed by Persian gold. Artaxerxes, learning his grandfather's lessons well, skillfully played the Greeks against each other. The King's Peace, or Peace of Antalcidas, 387 BCE, brokered by Persia, declared Persian sovereignty over the Greek cities of Asia Minor and asserted the king as the guarantor of autonomy for all other Greek states. It was a diplomatic triumph, restoring Persian hegemony in Anatolia without major fighting. Yet the satrapal cancer spread. Egypt remained defiantly independent. Worse, major satraps in Anatolia, Thatanes in Cappadocia, Ariobarzanes in Hellespontine Phrygia, and later, the formidable alliance of satraps known as the Great Satraps' Revolt, c. 366 to 360 BCE, rose in open rebellion. They minted their own coins, raised armies, formed alliances with Athens and Sparta, and acted as independent kings. Artaxerxes, aging and perhaps less decisive, struggled to contain them. Intrigue, bribery, and assassination became tools as common as open warfare. The central authority, symbolized by the king's distant fire, seemed to flicker. Through this long twilight, Persian culture endured. Zoroastrianism deepened its hold. Artaxerxes was notably devout. Inscriptions invoke Ahura Mazda, Anahita, a water goddess increasingly integrated into royal worship, and Mithra, god of covenant and the sun. Temples to honor Heta rose, reflecting a more temple-focused practice alongside the traditional fire cults. The Avesta, Zoroaster's hymns and teachings, began to be compiled and written down, preserving the ancient wisdom. In Persepolis, despite the empire's troubles, Artaxerxes added his own palace. The reliefs remained serene, depicting nobles, guards, and subject peoples in their eternal procession. But the reality outside the terrace walls was one of fraying edges, of an empire relying increasingly on inertia, diplomacy, and the sheer difficulty of dislodging such an ancient structure. The farmer in Fars still prayed to the household fire, the merchant still traveled the royal road, though perhaps with more caution, the scribe still recorded taxes. But the sense of invincible, divinely ordered permanence that marked the days of Darius I had faded, replaced by a weary resilience against the slow creep of drudge. The gathering storm, Artaxerxes III and the brutal restoration, 359 to 338 BCE. Artaxerxes II's long, troubled reign ended in 359 BCE. His son, Ochus, ascended as Artaxerxes III. He inherited an empire where royal authority was a whisper in many satrapies. Ochus was a different breed, ruthless, energetic, and determined to restore the iron grip of the great kings at any cost. His very name choice signaled a return to the power of Artaxerxes II's father, Darius II. His first act was chilling, the systematic assassination of nearly all his potential rivals within the royal family, brothers, uncles, cousins, to eliminate any focus for rebellion. It was a brutal assertion of control, shocking even by the standards of Persian court intrigue. Drudge, in his eyes, required eradication, root and branch. His focus turned to the rebellious satraps. Artaxerxes III moved with relentless force. Using a combination of loyal Persian troops and Greek mercenaries, a testament to Persia's enduring wealth and the Greeks' willingness to sell their swords, he crushed the remnants of the great satraps' revolt. Satraps who had ruled like kings were hunted down, executed, or fled. Autonomy was stamped out. Loyal eunuchs and trusted generals were installed as new satraps, their power more tightly controlled from Susa. The message was clear: defiance meant death. Egypt remained the greatest prize lost. Artaxerxes III launched multiple campaigns down the Nile. Initial attempts failed against the determined pharaohs of the 30th dynasty, notably Nectanebo I and II, who used Greek mercenaries effectively. The Persians faced scorched earth tactics, flooded canals, and fierce resistance. But Artaxerxes persisted. Finally, in 343 BCE, a massive Persian force, bolstered by experienced Greek commanders and troops, overwhelmed Egyptian defenses. Memphis fell. Nectanebo II fled south to Nubia. Egypt was brutally re-annexed. Temples were plundered to refill the imperial coffers, rebellions were savagely suppressed. The Nile Valley groaned once more under the Persian yoke. Artaxerxes III's methods restored imperial territory but deepened resentment. His rule was one of terror and exaction. The heavy taxes needed to fund his constant wars and the lavish court fell hard on the provinces. Even Babylon, long a pillar of the empire, chafed. Artaxerxes ordered the demolition of the city's fortifications, a humiliating blow to its ancient pride. He rebuilt the navy, projecting power into the Aegean, intervening in Greek affairs to counter the rising power of Macedon under Philip II. Persian gold flowed once more, subsidizing Greek city-states willing to resist Philip. It was a holding action, an attempt to manage a threat emerging from the fringes. In 338 BCE, at the apparent height of his restored power, Artaxerxes III died suddenly in his palace. Poison was suspected, administered by his trusted minister, the eunuch Bagoas. The brutal restorer of the empire fell victim to the very atmosphere of suspicion and violence he had fostered. His son, Artaxerxes IV, briefly succeeded, only to be murdered by Bagoas within 2 years. The empire, momentarily unified by force, now teetered on the brink, its leadership decimated, its provinces exhausted, its treasury strained, and a storm gathering in the west that would dwarf all previous challenges. The fires burned, but the wind was rising. The last flame, Darius III and the shadow from the west, 336 to 330 BCE. Bagoas, the kingmaker eunuch, sought a pliable ruler. He placed Ars's cousin on the throne, Codomanus, a distant royal relative known more for personal courage in battle against the Cadousians than for political ambition. He took the throne named Darius III. Bagoas soon discovered his error. Darius III proved independent. In a swift reversal, the poison meant for the king was instead forced upon Bagoas. The era of the eunuch's dominance ended. Darius III inherited an empire superficially restored by Artaxerxes III's iron fist, but fundamentally weakened. Egypt remained subdued but resentful. Babylon's spirit was wounded. The satrapal system, purged of rebels, was now staffed with men chosen for loyalty over competence or local legitimacy. The immense cost of Artaxerxes' wars and the brutal exactions had drained treasuries and goodwill. The royal road still functioned, the administration still issued decrees, the fires still burned in the Eteshka, but the vital spark, the sense of invincible divine mandate, was fading. The storm from the west was no longer distant thunder. Philip II of Macedon had united Greece under his hegemony. His assassination in 336 BCE brought only a brief pause. His son, Alexander, young but burning with ambition and tactical genius, crossed the Hellespont in 334 BCE. He came not merely to raid, but to conquer, declaring himself the avenger of Greece for Persia's past invasions, a potent, if cynical, rallying cry. The first clash came at the Granicus River in Anatolia. Darius III's satraps, commanding a mixed force of Persian cavalry, Greek mercenaries, and local levies, chose to fight Alexander head-on at the river bank. It was a disaster. Alexander led the charge personally, shattering the Persian line. Satraps fell, the vaunted Greek mercenaries were surrounded and slaughtered. Western Anatolia lay open. Darius III, realizing the scale of the threat, gathered the full might of the empire. At Issus, near the Syrian coast, 333 BCE, the two kings finally faced each other. Darius commanded from a magnificent chariot in the center, surrounded by his immortals. Alexander, again leading the decisive cavalry charge on the right, smashed through the Persian left flank and drove straight towards the royal command post. Darius, seeing his guard overwhelmed, panicked. He abandoned his chariot, mounted a horse, and fled the field, leaving his family, his mother, wife, and children, behind in his camp. Alexander captured them, treating them with royal courtesy, a masterstroke of psychological warfare. The defeat was catastrophic. Syria and Phoenicia submitted. Egypt, ever resentful of Persian rule, welcomed Alexander as a liberator in 332 BCE. He was crowned pharaoh. Darius retreated to the heartland, desperately trying to raise a new army from the eastern satrapies, Bactria, Sojdina, India. He sent letters offering Alexander all lands west of the Euphrates, then all lands west of the Euphrates plus a vast ransom for his family. Alexander refused, he wanted the entire empire. The final confrontation came near Gaugamela, in Assyria, 331 BCE. Darius prepared the ground meticulously, leveling terrain for his chariots and scythed cavalry. His army was immense, drawn from the farthest reaches of the realm. Alexander, outnumbered perhaps 5-1, employed brilliant tactics, creating a gap in the Persian center. Again, he led the companion cavalry in a direct assault aimed at Darius. Once more, as the Macedonian lancers closed in, Darius turned his chariot and fled. His army, seeing their king retreat, dissolved into rout. Darius fled east, towards Ecbatana, then Bactria, hoping to raise yet another army. But hope dwindled. His own satraps, Bessus of Bactria and Barsaentes, saw him as a liability, a bringer of defeat and drudge. Near Hecatompylus, they seized him, bound him in golden chains, and fled further east. As Alexander's relentless pursuit closed in, Bessus and his conspirators mortally wounded Darius and left him by the roadside. The story reached Alexander, a Macedonian soldier finding the dying king of kings, offering him water. Darius, in his final moments, thanked the soldier and blessed Alexander, wishing him success in ruling the world. Whether true or legend, it marked the poignant end. Darius III, the last Achaemenid great king, died not on a throne, but in the dust near the Caspian gates, a fugitive betrayed by his own, in the summer of 330 BCE. The empire founded by Cyrus the Great 2 centuries before, the vast tapestry woven from countless peoples and cultures, had unraveled. The fires of Ahura Mazda still burned on the altars, but the hand that had been their chief protector on earth was stilled. A new era, Macedonian, Hellenistic, was dawning. Embers in the wind, 330 BCE and after. Alexander found Darius's body. He ordered it borne with honor to Persepolis, to be laid to rest in the royal tombs alongside his ancestors. It was a gesture of respect, perhaps, or a symbol of continuity he wished to project. He entered Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of Achaemenid power, not as a destroyer initially, but as a conqueror claiming his prize. The treasures of Cyrus, Darius, Xerxes, accumulated over 2 centuries, filled vast storerooms. Then came the fire. Whether a deliberate act of policy, retribution for Xerxes' burning of Athens, a drunken impulse during a feast, or an accident lost to time, the great palaces of Persepolis were set ablaze. The cedar ceilings roared, the limestone glowed and cracked, the magnificent reliefs depicting the harmony of the empire blackened and scarred. The Apadana's towering columns stood like charred sentinels over the ruin. It was a visceral, shocking end. The physical symbol of Persian imperial glory, the stage for the king's reception of the nations, was reduced to smoldering ash. Alexander marched on, chasing Bessus, who had declared himself Artaxerxes V, into the wilds of Bactria and Sogdiana. The eastern satrapies resisted fiercely, guerrilla wars flaring in mountain passes and desert oases. It took years of hard campaigning to subdue them. Alexander adopted Persian dress, incorporated Persian nobles into his administration, married Roxana, a Sogdian princess, and staged mass weddings between his officers and Persian noblewomen at Susa. He spoke of fusion, of a joint Macedonian-Persian rule. But for the Persian people, the world had irrevocably changed. The Shahanshah, Ahura Mazda's regent on earth, was gone. The satrapal system was replaced by Macedonian generals and Greek administrators. Greek became the language of power and trade. The royal road now served new masters. The immense wealth that had flowed into imperial coffers was dispersed to Alexander's soldiers or funneled to build new Greek cities, Alexandria in Egypt, Alexandria Eschate in Sogdiana. Yet Persia did not vanish. In the villages of Persis, farmers still sowed barley and tended goats. Magi,